right now, for everyone who is concerned with ending injustice and oppression, and with the question of whether humanity will have a future worth living, or will have a future at all, removing the Trump-Pence fascist regime from power is an immediate, urgent question and truly historic imperative.
Welcome to episode 25 of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. Today is September 10th, 2020. My name is Andy Zee. I'm the host of the show. We're here in Los Angeles, California. And the show opened up with an important paragraph from this recent statement by the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian on the immediate critical situation, the urgent need to drive out the fascist Trump-Pence regime, voting in this election, and the fundamental need for revolution. And I'm here today with my co-host, Sunsara Taylor. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, Andy. How are you?
All right. So we had a big weekend this past weekend on September 5th. There was a nationwide protest. Over 1,700 people came out around the country to demand Trump-Pence out now and to launch 60 days of struggle, which is going to be a big focus of our program today. So why don't we at least give people a sense of what to expect in the next hour?
Yeah, so we're going to start with voices and scenes from the streets on September 5th for the launch of 60 Days of Struggle by RefuseFascism.org, protests in over 20 cities, and to raise the demand, Trump Pence out now, and to fight for that. So we're going to kick off giving you a sense of what emerged on this day, and then we're pretty much the rest of the show is going to be dedicated to making the case for why we have to carry this forward and some sense of how. So right after that, we're going to share two excerpts or two pieces of a new series from Bob Avakian, which has been featured on revcom.us, the website that we produce this show in association with. And the series is called Donald Trump, Genocidal Racist. And that'll be read by Noche Diaz, who's the spokesperson nationally for the Revolution Clubs.
Yeah, and we'll be telling you more about who Bob Avakian is in that context. And then we're going to be going to a section of this statement that I mentioned that Bob Avakian gave on August 1st, the section on voting in this election, which is something that I think people will find very important and very critical in this time. And then after that, what's next?
We're going to share a portion of the speech that I gave actually on September 5th. I gave one of the main speeches in Los Angeles. I was speaking on behalf of Refuse Fascism nationally, and we wanted to share some of it because we think some of it is in the video that we open with, the roundup, but there's arguments that were made there that we want to bring to you, and then that builds into a commentary that Andy is going to close with, which I will go on record. I've been quoted already. It's a killer commentary from Andy on the moment and the challenge before us, and it's a challenge to all of you watching. So you definitely want to stick through to the end and join us in this journey of the show and in the mission that we're going on together.
Yeah, so that's important because, look, this show is dedicated to that all of you can understand more deeply and thoroughly what it is we face and what needs to be done and how we're going to do it. So with that, let's get right into it. I want to go right to the video that was our crew has put together for Refuse Fascism on the September 5th protests.
Here and now, we pledge to unite in our millions, rising together in nonviolent resistance to stop a great horror. We pledge to stay in the streets, overcoming fear and uncertainty until this American fascism is brought to a halt. We demand Trump, Pence out now.
Trump, Pence out now.
We will not stop until they're gone.
This is history in the making, like seriously so important, and people are gonna ask, what did you do, you know?
ending fascism would be one step closer to helping mitigate the climate emergency, one step closer to stamping out white supremacy and ending a lot of the racial injustice that we have about. So for me, all of these issues are so intertwined, there's no reason not to show up.
And I'm here fighting for everybody, not just me, not just my family, but for everybody. All lives matter. The black lives don't need to matter first because they keep on killing us.
This is serious, and so it feels good to know that there's other people that see it too, and I think we can find strength together.
We are saying today on September 5th that we are making a living declaration, that we are uniting, we are organizing, we are determined, and we will not stop. We will keep going until we drive the Trump-Pence regime from power and stop and bring this fascist assault to a halt.
Just listen to the words of Miles Taylor, the former head of the Department of Homeland Security who served under Trump. He said, "There are people serving very close to the president that have told me verbatim, we should expect, quote, shock and awe if the president wins a second term."
If we lose democracy, we lose everything. No Medicare for all, no defunding the police, no progressive policies whatsoever.
They want to force all women to have children against their will. And listen well, there is nothing funny about Donald Trump's so-called joke when he said Mike Pence wants to hang all the gay people.
Well, it is dangerous. This is like a tipping point, and you can feel it. He has vigilantes, literal vigilante people coming out murdering protesters.
Another 4 years of this, man, we're going to be in concentration camps again. We're going to be out there picking cotton again if we don't stop them.
It's not just going to be bad, it's going to be a nightmare. Like everything that we've seen in these streets, there is no defund the police in a fascist America. There is no movement for black lives that they can lock you up and break your knees and kill you in the streets. And so this is why we are calling for everybody, every group, the environmental rights group, Black Lives Matter, immigrants' rights, women's rights. Don't stop fighting for your individual issue. But now is the time to come together in our millions to drive out this regime.
So I'm also a civil rights lawyer with the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. So we know this administration is separating families, traumatizing children on purpose as a tactic of terror. And we're seeing and experiencing something unlike anything we've ever seen.
In the face of the farce of an impeachment trial in the Senate, Trump actually had his lawyers say that the Constitution lets him do anything he wants. Anything he wants! When you look closely and honestly at Trump's record, you realize what he means by law and order. He means Trump's law, Trump's order. That's right. And I think religious folks have to say, this doesn't represent our values.
This puffed up idiot talks tough, hiding behind an army of death and destruction that has been built up through a whole history of plunder and war and genocide and slavery. Anybody could stand behind that and talk tough. And that is all that they have. What we have is us. The masses of people in our millions who refuse to live in a fascist America.
They've been using the virus against black and brown people. They cheer on the police when they pump 7 bullets into the back of an unarmed black man's back in front of his 3 little children. They cheer and they call them heroes. Okay? We're not uniting with them. We're rising up in our millions. This is what we're calling for. Masses to rise up in our mass millions to completely overshadow them and dwarf them.
When you see a senior, please have the social distancing, even if you're young. And to the seniors here, I want to say to you, do what I do. I stick to the sides near the sidewalk, okay? But I show up. I show up. I show up. I show up. And I bring my friends to show up and get them out of office. Trump and Pence, out now.
I understand this real fear out there, but later people are gonna ask. This is an important time. This is history in the making, like seriously so important, and people are gonna ask, what did you do, you know? Where were you? Did you help? Did you stand? What do you want to tell people in the future? What are you going to be proud to share?
This is not a one-day show. We didn't call you out here to register that you don't like Donald Trump and then to go back home and wait to see what happened. We called you out here to be the beginning core of the force that is going to reach out to and enlist others, that's going to mobilize others, that's going to organize others to take up the 60 days of defiant resistance, to organize town halls, community speak-outs, protests, all different forms, cultural events, to go through notable points in September and to be the force in October that can bring people out into the streets day after day, night after night, in growing numbers, with the demand, Trump, Pence, out now.
October must belong to us. October must belong to us. Not Trump and not his fascist goons. So we gotta be on a mission to change this equation so that in November he is not easily able to delay the elections or whatever other thing he may try to do.
There is beauty, there is power, and there is meaning in standing up together to stop this fascist America. Not only there's beauty and power in stopping this catastrophe for humanity, but there is beauty and power in meaning in becoming the kind of people who stand up for each other, who look out for each other, who put humanity first, not ourselves or America first. There is beauty in our diversity. There is beauty in our courage. There is beauty in our helping each other overcome their fear. If we here today promise and pledge together that we will go forward from here, we will change our lives to change what others are doing. We will overcome our own fear and uncertainty to help others overcome theirs. If we make this our mission together for the next 60 days, we can awaken and arouse a force that can bring a great gift to humanity. We can drive out a fascist America. Next, we're going to bring you part 2 and part 3 of a new must-read series from Bob Avakian at revcom.us called Donald Trump, Genocidal Racist. Reading this for you is going to be Noche Diaz. He is the national spokesperson for the Revolution Clubs and for the National Get Organized for an Actual Revolution tour. I'm not going to say more about the series because you're going to hear from it yourself in just a moment. But I do want to say a few words about Bob Avakian. We here at the Revolution Nothing Less show are followers of Bob Avakian, which means we base ourselves on the leadership and the new framework for human emancipation, the new communism that Bob Avakian has forged. And we think you should be a follower of Bob Avakian too, which is why we bring you his work every week. Bob Avakian is the most important political leader and thinker in the world today. He's the complete opposite of all these bourgeois leaders who try to sell you on the idea that we can make a few reforms to this system of capitalism, imperialism, and somehow solve humanity's problems. Bob Avakian bases himself on the scientific understanding that this system cannot be reformed and must be overthrown, that there is no way to put an end to the white supremacy, the patriarchal degradation of women and LGBTQ people, the demonization and cruelty carried out against immigrants, the wars for empire and crimes against humanity, and the devastation of the planet and the environment itself. There's no way to end these things through reform under this system. This system must be overthrown and replaced. For decades, Bob Avakian has worked to develop the strategy to make this kind of revolution. He's advanced the scientific understanding of the methods and the approaches necessary to understand the world deeply and transform it in the interests of humanity. And he's forged a new concrete framework for a new society, a constitution for the new socialist republic in North America, where human beings could meet our most fundamental needs and go to work on overcoming all forms of exploitation and oppression. And he has fought tirelessly to put this understanding, this strategy, this scientific approach, this vision in the hands of growing numbers of people, including those who are most cast off and treated as less than human by this system, so that people from all backgrounds can take this up and wield it as conscious fighters for revolution and emancipators of humanity. You can find more about Bob Avakian's life and development, about the new communism that he has forged, and about the ongoing leadership he is providing for this revolution at revcom.us. Here, I just want to note that one of the most formative things about Bob Avakian growing up, and one of the things that propelled him into the fight for justice and then for revolution, was his deep connection to the lives of Black people and his deep determination to see the oppression of Black people ended. This remains a cornerstone of the revolution that he is fighting for, and this comes through in the series that we're bringing you today. So with that, this is Noche Diaz reading Part 2 and Part 3 of Bob Avakian's series, Donald Trump, Genocidal Racist.
I'm Noche Diaz, spokesperson for the Revolution Clubs. I'll be reading Donald Trump, Genocidal Racist Part 2 by Bob Avakian. Donald Trump hates Black people and everybody who is not a white, English-speaking Christian American. If he could, he would kill off a whole lot of them and put many of the rest in jail for life or drive them out of the country. Don't believe it? Think that's an exaggeration? That it's going too far to say that about Trump? It's not. Trump has spouted and shouted vicious racism for years and decades. 30 years ago, the Central Park Five, a group of Black and Latino teenagers, were charged with raping and beating a white woman almost to death in Central Park in New York City. Donald Trump took out newspaper ads calling for these youth to be put to death. The Central Park Five were railroaded to jail for years until it was finally proven beyond a doubt that they were innocent. Did Trump admit he was wrong and apologize for calling innocent Black and brown teenagers to be executed? No. During his campaign for president in 2016, he still insisted that these youth were still guilty, despite definite proof that they were not. In the same campaign, Trump insisted that stop and frisk, which in New York City and some other places had terrorized huge numbers of Black and brown youth who were innocent of committing any actual crime, should be put into effect not just in one or a few cities, but all over the country. If all this is what Trump wants to do with Black and brown youth, without even caring whether they are innocent, what do you think he wants to do with all those he finds guilty of the crime of not being white Americans? If you think this is an exaggeration, going too far to say this about Trump, then you still don't know who Donald Trump really is. Look for Part 3, further evidence of Donald Trump as a genocidal racist. This is a series by Bob Avakian appearing on revcom.us. I'm Noche Diaz, spokesperson for the Revolution Clubs. I'll be reading Donald Trump, Genocidal Racist Part 3 by Bob Avakian. Early in his last campaign for president, Trump declared that he was going to build a wall to keep out Mexicans, calling the people who come to the U.S. from Mexico drug dealers, rapists, and criminals. He said that a judge in a legal case Trump was involved in could not be fair to Trump because the judge was of Mexican heritage. A textbook case of racism, as even a powerful Trump supporter had to admit. Since becoming president, along with unleashing vicious raids to deport immigrants, tearing apart families, Trump has put tens of thousands of immigrants, mostly from Mexico and nearby countries in Central America, in concentration camps on the border, while separating even very young migrant children from their parents. Many people have pointed out that all this is the kind of thing Hitler did to demonize and criminalize the Jews as he put them in concentration camps and then murdered 6 million of them. If you don't think Trump would do something as extreme as killing off large parts of those he has demonized and criminalized, you still don't know who Donald Trump really is. Look for Part 4, further evidence of Donald Trump as a genocidal racist. This is a series by Bob Avakian appearing on revcom.us.
Bob Avakian poses this question in his August 1st statement on the immediate critical situation, the urgent need to drive out the fascist Trump-Pence regime, voting in this election, and the fundamental need for revolution.
Normally, we revolutionary communists argue that people should not vote in bourgeois elections, which serve to reinforce the existing system of capitalism, imperialism, and feed popular illusions that exploitation, oppression, and injustices can somehow be reformed away, short of getting rid of the system that gives rise to these horrors in the first place. But is this the right position to take in relation to this particular election?
Today's RNL show has featured Refuse Fascism's launch of 60 Days of Struggle this past Saturday, September 5th, the call for mass, sustained, nonviolent protest to drive out the Trump-Pence regime. In his August 1st statement, Bob Avakian goes deeply into why, without this mass, sustained, nonviolent protest beginning soon and growing to millions, the results will be disastrous. At the same time, after deeply exposing the fascist nature of the Trump-Pence regime and the need for such unprecedented struggle, later in this statement, Bob Avakian speaks directly to the question he posed of what is the right position to take regarding voting in this election.
At this critical hour, every appropriate means of nonviolent action must be utilized to remove this regime from power. And if, in spite of mass protest demanding the removal of the Trump-Pence regime, this regime remains in power when it is time for voting, then, without placing fundamental reliance on this, using all appropriate means to work for the removal of this regime must include voting against Trump, assuming the election is actually held. To be clear, this means not a protest vote for some candidate who has no chance of winning, but actually voting for the Democratic Party candidate Biden in order to effectively vote against Trump.
BA goes on to say, this is not because Biden and the Democratic Party in general have suddenly become something other than what they are, representatives and instruments of this exploitative, oppressive, and literally murderous system of capitalism imperialism. The electoral process continues to be what we Revcoms have called it, BEB, bourgeois electoral bullshit. It remains the case that no fundamental change for the better can come about through this electoral process, and that in general and overall, voting under this system serves to reinforce this system, especially if voting is seen as a way, and more so if it is seen as the only way to bring about any meaningful change. Bob Avakian goes on.
But this election is different. It is true that with every election, the Democrats run the same basic con game, blackmailing people who hate injustice and oppression to vote for them as the lesser evil, insisting, in effect, that you may not agree with everything we say, you may even have serious differences and criticisms regarding what we're all about, but do you want them to be in power? the openly white supremacist, male supremacist, climate change denying plunderers of the environment, and all-around reactionary Republican Party. And the Democratic Party has done this time after time after time, while itself representing and seeking to preside over this system of capitalism imperialism, which has white supremacy, male supremacy, environmental plunder, and wars for empire built into it, at the same time as the Democrats make noises about and take some steps to implement minor and ultimately meaningless reforms to supposedly address these outrages. All this has actually contributed to the development of things toward the terrible situation we are faced with now. It has politically paralyzed many who seek an end to such outrages, reducing them to passive dependence on the Democratic Party and its role in the electoral process, while adding fuel to the fire of the die-hard fascist sections of society that insist on absolutely no mitigation of these outrages, no concession to the struggle against this, and in fact demand the brutal reinforcement of this oppression and outrage in extreme terms. But again, this election is different in a crucially important way. The question is not whether Biden and the Democrats represent something good, or whether in fundamental terms the Democrats are better than the Republicans. Both of these parties are ruling class political parties, and none of their candidates represent anything good in the most basic and essential sense. Biden is not better than Trump in any meaningful way, except that he is not Trump and is not part of the move to consolidate and enforce fascist rule with everything that means.
So that was Bob Avakian on voting from his August 1st statement. Read the whole statement on revcom.us and let us know what you think or your questions. You can write us at the revcoms@gmail.com. You can go on to the forum at revcom.us.
Fascism is not just the worst of Republican policies. Fascism is a qualitative change in the form of rule. It's the obliteration of what have been the norms, the evisceration of the democratic rights we've been told we have, to stand up and oppose them in the streets through protest or even from within the halls of power. Fascism is a form of rule that relies on open terror and violence from the state and from the mob against everyone that they deem an enemy, undesirable, or danger to society. And let's be very clear, sisters and brothers, this is not standing still. We are gathered at a moment when Donald Trump has unleashed and defended the vigilante killer who stole the lives of 2 heroic protesters in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Anthony Huber and Jojo Rosenbaum, who were standing up for black lives. We are gathered at a time when MAGA fascists rode through Portland on the back of pickup trucks, spraying protesters with paint guns and other weapons like the American Taliban they are. We are gathered as Bill Barr, the highest law enforcement agent in the country, is restructuring the state to brand protesters terrorists and lock them away for life.
We are gathered just days after Donald Trump went in and did a photo op and a meeting with a sheriff in Wisconsin who publicly advocated taking a whole generation of black youth, locking them in warehouses, depriving them of the right to have children, and leaving them there until the whole generation had died off. And then he said we could turn those warehouses into shopping malls. Donald Trump posed with him after this tape came out. This is cold, straight up genocide they are talking about. This is genocide, and as Bob Avakian, the revolutionary leader, has said and published in a new series that everybody should go read at revcom.us, Donald Trump is a genocidal racist. These fascists are fighting to lock all this and more into place through a second term, whether it takes stealing, sabotaging, or outright canceling the elections. Every day new projections come out from well-informed, ruling class figures about the danger of Trump declaring himself the winner, even if it means spewing an avalanche of lies, breaking the law, and unleashing violence and bloodshed in the streets. Many are now saying, well, if he does that, then we should take to the streets and do like they've done in Hong Kong and Belarus. Well, they have a point, but we cannot wait for him to do that. We cannot passively wait for things to get worse. Think about it. That would be like if the LA Lakers sat their best players down on the bench for the first 3 quarters and let the other team rack up a great lead, and then said, well, if we really fall behind, we'll put LeBron James on the court. Well, these fascists have racked up a lead. They are in the streets. We can't wait to get out on the court ourselves. We have to go out in the streets now and every day going forward and steal the initiative back from them. This is why refusefascism.org is launching, starting today, starting with all of us here, starting with everybody in the 24 other cities that are gathered today. We are launching 60 days of struggle.
With all that you've seen and heard on today's show and on previous episodes, it comes to this. A path was blazed on September 5th. Will you walk on that, or will you turn away? We're laced up and we're ready. Those who took the streets on September 5th were the first rush of a fresh stream pouring down from the mountain of the masses, people's outrage and their determination to stop all that is the Trump-Pence regime. This can and must become a torrent over the next 60 days. The lines are drawn. Trump, Pence, their regime, and their fascist base are moving. Did you know that right now, every week, there are MAGA boat rallies, car caravans, militias stalking communities, vigilantes and police and paramilitary suppressing protest and voters? Well, they plot to mobilize all this to intimidate at polling places while subverting the counting of absentee ballots. What was begun with each and every person who took to the streets across the country on September 5th is as precious as the first drops of water to parched earth. Now each and all can and must be marshaled and organized so that October is our month, a month that begins sustained nonviolent protests, building in numbers and determination, so that by November there are not just the MAGA Trump forces in the field, but instead there is an unstoppable flood of people in the streets, committed, determined, overcoming and putting to the side their differences to unite and say with many voices, Trump-Pence out now. To be fired at their core that not in our name will we allow another day of rule by this fascist regime. To be inspired and determined to demonstrate in word and in deed, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. Do not underestimate what we have begun, for in word and deed on September 5th, we posed the questions that each and all of us must answer and continue to answer, again in word and deed. Questions that must be put before people everywhere. What are you going to do for the next 60 days and beyond? And who are you going to be? Will you say, I didn't join those who took to the streets in nonviolent protests to demand the Trump-Pence regime out now because I thought Biden would win and Trump was all bluster? Will you say, I didn't join the protests in the streets because Trump is just a reactionary psychopath and fascism couldn't really happen here? Will you say, I didn't join the protests in the streets because I don't want to be associated with anarchists and revolutionary communists or Marxists, because I want change, but without any cost. I want the rain, but without thunder and lightning. Will you say, as some people have told us, that life in the hood and the barrio is always hard, and we are always dogged by the system and its police, so we got to deal with things where we're at. Trump won't mean anything different for us. Well, did you know that in Germany and Eastern Europe, before the Nazis came to power, Jewish people were oppressed and confined to the ghettos? When Hitler came to full power, it was only 8 years before these Jews were rounded up and sent to concentration camps. Or will you say, as some people have told us, that they didn't join the protests in the streets because they know that the Biden Democrats are just as bad as the Republicans, and I am working for real change, ignoring the reality of what was staring them in the face, that the Trump-Pence regime and the fascist movement it leads could seriously wipe out for a long time the possibility of the kind of change that they thought would come. Here, too, the example of Germany is relevant, where for a time the radical revolutionary forces failed to unite, some having the slogan, "After Hitler, us," which tragically became, "After Hitler, concentration camps." So dismiss this as hyperbole, argue that it hasn't happened yet, so it won't. Tell yourself reassuring tidbits of history about all the differences between America 2020 and Germany 1933, but be warned here that if you do this and fail to heed the call to join together in the streets now to demand Trump-Pence out now, if you fail to squarely look in the face of reality without illusion or delusion, if we fail to unite in our great diversity for these 60 days of struggle this fall, you will then bitterly learn how it actually did happen in Germany in 1933. And here's a more underlying question. What country, what world will you, will we, will humanity wake up to in February 2021? If it is a fascist world, which is what is coming if we don't rise up in nonviolent mass-sustained protests to drive the Trump-Pence regime from power, then all of your reasons, all of your excuses, all of your rationalizations will evaporate like a drop of water in the hot sun. This hot sun will be ruled by those who are changing the rules, those who rule only by force and terror, those who are committed and determined white supremacists enforcing a fascist, racist genocide, those who are Christian fascists insisting that women and LGBTQ people go back, those who terrorize and put immigrants in concentration camps. But September 5th showed that all of this is not necessary. There is a way forward. To each and every person who came out on September 5th, and to all who are watching or hearing about this on this show or elsewhere, know this. You and all of the 1,700 who came out did so in recognition of the danger we face and in defiance of the prevalent thinking that all we can do is vote and wait to see if Trump loses, steals, or defies the election, let alone that he could actually win the election. With this possibility made all the stronger if we are not mobilized while the Trump fascist forces rampage around the country. We know that being the first ones out and in the face of all the reasons given to not do so is not easy. But you stepped out of your comfort zones because you recognized that it mattered, and now others can and need to follow in your path. So now each of us needs to reach out and bring others forward. Go to the websites refusefascism.org and revcom.us to get the orientation, the argument, and the materials to bring others forward right now. Go to those sites which amplify what you saw in the opening video today, of people of different backgrounds coming together who think that science and reality matter, that justice matters, and that all of those who came out of different struggles, saving the environment from extinction, saving black and brown lives, immigrants, women's LGBTQ rights, people fighting for various reforms, and we RevComs working to prepare today for the time when we could make an actual revolution. All of these concerns and all of these causes that affect humanity joining together in recognition that the continuation of the Trump-Pence fascist regime, that the consolidation of fascism will bring disaster not just to these causes, but to the entirety of humanity. Everyone is needed now, not just when the shit hits the fan. First of all, it has. If the blatant murder of people protesting for Black Lives, murder by MAGA, fascist vigilante does not wake and shake you to the real and the present danger, then take your pulse. The people really do have the power. I will repeat, it is on each and all of us to do all we can to arouse, to inspire, and to organize that into a mighty torrent starting now, 60 days of struggle, so that going into this election, our side has the initiative, so that whatever the Trump-Pence regime does, there is a powerful movement in the streets that has forged the ways to work in concert with each other, and that will be prepared to mobilize with ever greater determination should Trump refuse to leave office. On September 5th, we carved open a path to stop the great calamity that the continuation and consolidation of the Trump-Pence regime would mean. This path needs to and can grow to millions. That is possible because there are millions of people who feel that the horror of this regime must be over. And I close this commentary with the following from Bob Avakian in a statement he made soon after the murder of George Floyd on June 1st, when there were millions of people beginning to rise up in the streets of this country. He said, "We need a world without white supremacy and male supremacy, a world where no one is regarded as alien, a world without war, where people from all over the globe, with the beautiful flowering of diversity, act together for the common good and are truly caretakers of the earth. This is not just a dream. The possibility for this is being powerfully demonstrated in this uprising of the people of all different races and genders from all parts of the world, refusing to remain silent and passive while all this oppression and brutality goes on." That was from Bob Avakian in the beginning of the mass uprising after the murder of George Floyd. The struggle over the next period is a crucial part of making this real. And ultimately, to realize this world will require an actual revolution. And we who work for that revolution are all in fighting today with all we've got to drive out the Trump-Pence regime. And we want to join with all of you and with millions of people to say, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.